Teachers are the most important people in the world. I truly believe that. I think that teachers are so hamstrung by so much BS. Teachers go into education because they want to help kids, and they end up having to check a whole bunch of boxes. I would let teachers of going back to the root cause of why they wanted to be teachers in the first place, give them sufficient structure and sufficient oversight to make sure that, enough learning outcomes are made, but equally recognize that teachers have a different role to play, and let the teacher figure out how do they create the best sense of wholeness in their school and their community for the students, and let teachers go back to why they wanted to become teachers in the first place.
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast. There are few folks outside the formal education system who have influenced young people at the scale Marc Kielburger has. For more than 3 decades, he and his brother helped shape a generation's understanding of service, citizenship, and collective action. Through Free the Children and later We, they built an organization that tied hope to collective action, something that all schools hope to cultivate. I'm genuinely honored to have Marc on the podcast because many of us in education watch students light up at We Day events over the years. We saw young people begin to imagine that their voices truly mattered, that service was not abstract but possible, that they could do something. And whatever your political views, it's impossible to deny the reach of that movement and the sense of agency it offered millions of students all across Canada. In this conversation, we reflect on what it takes to build movements that invite young people into meaningful action. Marc shares how his journey began and how his early conviction evolved into a global effort focused on education, opportunity, and human dignity. We also address the political fallout in Canada that created a false narrative and one that ultimately dismantled much of the We Foundation's presence here. We talk candidly about that loss, but also about resilience, about what it means to continue the work when circumstances shift, and his current initiatives, including Legacy Plus, that partners with major global organizations to build purpose-driven initiatives in the United States and internationally, as well as his new podcast with Martin Luther King III and Andrea Waters King and his brother Craig Kielburger, that explores what it means to build meaningful legacy in turbulent time. We also discuss the future of education itself. Marc speaks passionately about the central role of teachers, not just as instructors, but mentors, role models, and the necessary steady presence in a young person's life. We discuss how schools can better cultivate purpose, empathy, and global awareness in an era shaped by rapid technological change and social fragmentation. And we explore how education can move beyond performance metrics towards something more enduring. So, without further ado, here is my conversation with Marc Kielburger. Marc, welcome to the podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
Thank you. I'm in Toronto today, and great to be here.
Wonderful. Whereabouts in Toronto are you, Marc?
We're in the beaches area specifically, so not too far from down.
Nice. My sister lives in that area. It's actually rare that I actually interview anyone from the GTA these days, so it's always nice to have a Torontonian here on the podcast. So Marc, I would have given you a proper introduction at this stage, but can you give the audience a sense of what you're up to these days?
Oh my goodness, so many amazing things. Working with remarkable visionaries to help bring their legacy projects to life is a big project that we're working on. And get to work with people like the son of Dr. King, Martin Luther King III, and his amazing wife, Andrea Waters King, in preparation for the 100th birthday of Dr. King coming up in a handful of years. Really excited by that project, working with sports leagues and tens of thousands of teachers and schools and school projects and so many amazing things in the US, which we're very excited about. Working with the Dalai Lama Center and the work of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which is another passion project of mine, and love doing that work, and it's been absolutely remarkable. Working with amazing individuals like Tony Robbins, who has had a huge impact on our life growing up, and some of his philanthropic activities, and having the privilege to understand, where he's focusing his impact work, and he's very much about impact. And then on the personal side, working on a lot of efforts around longevity, health, and wellness. It's a personal passion project of mine, and working with amazing individuals, one of Canada's foremost longevity doctors named Dr. Tim Cook, and a gentleman who started something called Biohacking. His name is Dave Asprey, and we're working on this amazing initiative called Unlimited Life. So many remarkable projects with our team, loving getting up every morning and having so much fun.
Well, everyone who's listening who thinks they're busy, I think you just put them to shame.
We all have our journeys.
Yeah, fantastic, Marc. And I'd love to dive into all of that. But one of the things I love that you're doing on the podcast, the My Legacy podcast, is you really get to know your guests. And that's kind of a structure that I've had here. So I'd love to, take you back and get you to give the audience a sense of where and when you grew up.
Yeah, well, thank you for Jason said the My Legacy podcast is something that we do with the son of Dr. King, again, Martin Luther King III and Andrea Waters King. It's called My Legacy. And to the conversation we had just earlier, it's an opportunity to get to know amazing individuals and to get to know their backgrounds and their experiences. And we just passed 1 million subscribers on YouTube, which we're very proud of. And seeing these amazing conversations that we're having with just world leaders to social change makers. But for me, very humble beginning and background. Grew up just north of Toronto in an area called Thornhill. Both my parents were teachers. My dad taught French and my mom taught kids with learning differences. And that's where we and my brother and I learned our love of education. It was really much in an educational setting, in an educational classroom. Not only were our parents teachers, but all of our aunts were teachers. All of our uncles were teachers, and all of our cousins, except one, were teachers. So a remarkable family of educators.
Yeah, I'm in a similar situation where I might be the black sheep in doing work in educational podcasting, but everyone around me are a bunch of educators as well. And it's also been a theme of a lot of the guests here. Can I ask you, Marc, how did you play as a child growing up?
Played with a lot of love and affection, and not just play in terms of like regular play, but we did a lot of service work when we were young. My parents really encouraged us to volunteer, and they were big and very active in the community, in their schools, in their school community. So did a lot of work in that space. Loved a lot of sports, and that was a big part of my growing up too, and just getting to know people through that sense of community and building community through sports, and having a wonderful experience with that. And then also, my parents were very entrepreneurial when they were young as well. So every summer, we would move houses, and they would fix up the house throughout the entire year. And then basically the next year, they would flip the house, hopefully for some additional money, capital gains tax-free, and then move to the next house. So part of my play was actually work and turning to understand. I remember sitting around the table at the age of 8 and, having a conversation about interest rates and how that all worked. And so it was a pretty interesting experience growing up. It was very remarkable in terms of the learning environment and a lot of defining experiences as a kid.
What do you remember was your first love when it comes to learning? What did you first love learning to do?
My first big experience was I ended up winning the best science fair in Canada when I was in grade 7. And I loved learning about science in a way that applies or an applicable way, not in a purely scientific way, but how science can actually apply to one's life. And this science fair project was about alternative friendly home cleaning products of all things. It was like, using vinegar and borax and baking soda to clean your home. And my grandmother, who fortunately has passed away many years ago, I went to her house and I saw that how she cleaned her house was with these, literally things like vinegar and baking soda and lemon juice and, other things. And I went back to our house and my mom was trying to get me to do chores. And then I tried to probably, weasel my way out of the chores, saying like, look at, there's like all these horrible signature signs on the cleaning products, like danger, explosion, carcinogenic. Mom, you can't make me use these things. Look how bad they are. Which made me try to get out of chores, probably unsuccessfully, but nevertheless, more importantly, helped me understand that there's other ways of actually, doing things as simple as cleaning, and then understanding like the chemical compounds of these various different alternative friendly home cleaning products and how they were good for the environment versus the ones that we were using. And, way back then, these products that we were using were extremely ozone depleting, and that was a big issue. So came up with a whole bunch of recipes for alternative friendly home cleaners. And the Heinz company of all things, of course, that made vinegar as well, found this was quite interesting, and ended up publishing a book with them. And it was sold when you bought a container of Heinz vinegar. You could download the book and get information about all these different recipes, how you could use vinegar as a cleaning product. So that was my first love book.
Nice. Was that the spark that kind of set you on this path? Like you mentioned, you had educators as parents that were also very entrepreneurial. So I can already see some of the, the building blocks to the kind of career and life you've built. But was there something in particular that, kind of sparked you and or moved you into the work that you do?
Wonderful parents that really led by example. Really good down to the earth, just really good people who led by example. And again, not just my parents, but everybody in my family, as mentioned, were educators. And I just really want to express love and admiration for all the educators out there. It's, in so many words, a really difficult job at times, and often a thankless job at times, candidly. And it's such an important job. And I would argue the most important job. And being in around that environment is really what set my spark, and just being fully immersed in education, both inside and outside the classroom.
So most of the audience here, especially the Canadian audience, it does verge, globally now, but a lot of the Canadian audience will be very familiar with your work from Free the Children and We, and you started that when you and your brother were both quite young. What was that like? How did it come about, and sort of what were your biggest challenges in scaling that from like a small youth movement to what you've built it as a global organization?
Well, it was definitely some remarkable experiences, to say the least, and ups and downs, and just some amazing learnings, and just loved doing the work that we did over all those years. But Craig started my brother started when he was 12 years old. He read about the story of another 12-year-old boy in our local newspaper, the Toronto Star, who was a freed child laborer who spoke out against child labor and was killed for speaking out. And Craig saw this article, and Craig was 12 years old also at the time, and then took the article to his grade 7 class and said, I don't know, what to do, but guys, we need to do something. He's 12, we're all 12, we're many thousands of miles away, and we've had totally different lives. Is there anything we can do to help support young people our age who are involved with child labor? And they started a small club in their school, and they started doing petition and letter writing campaigns and so forth as well. And he asked me for my help shortly thereafter. And that's where, a lot of our initial work began. And people like Oprah Winfrey and others took us under their wing early on. And, a lot of luck and some significant hard work in between, and a lot of loving support of some amazing individuals, teachers in schools, and others who are still involved to this day, help support our projects. And our mission was really twofold, was to empower the next generation of young people to find issues and causes they cared about domestically, including here in Canada, but also in the US and the UK and other places where we had our operations. And then also internationally, doing the work on an international basis. Doing school building programs, education programs, water programs, health programs, built college, built a university / hospital, many other projects. So it was a remarkable journey, and had a huge impact on hundreds of thousands of kids.
So a lot of your sort of initiatives are, at the kind of intersection of business, philosophy, philanthropy, education. How do you view the way you've kind of connected these in-between spaces, if I can put it like that? Like, it seems like a very eclectic way of thinking about work and mission and education?
Our view of impact is how do we create the greatest impact with the limited time and limited resources that we have available to us. And we think that, especially in Canada, but the situation in terms of the limitations placed on charities and social enterprises and so forth is extremely difficult. And so you have to be very diligent and working within the system of how the Canadian government structures charities is very hard. When we first started, charities couldn't really earn their own income. You had to be reliant on donations, unless you got a specific waiver. You were, the Salvation Army. That subsequently has changed, but not changed enough. We think that businesses can have a huge impact when it comes to creating something called social enterprises. And social enterprises are businesses that basically, measure the impact that they're making, not just through profits, but through the type of impact that they're making through their products, their services, their activities, and so forth as well. And we think the business sector has a huge opportunity to do. And there's traditional businesses, that's great, but there's a middle space where, for example, we were doing socially responsible volunteer trips, or we were selling handmade products from women around the world to economically empower them. And these are all things that made no quote unquote traditional business sense if you're seeking to maximize profits, but had a huge impact when it came to the work that we were doing. And so, unfortunately, again, I think in Canada and to a certain degree, the US, we're far behind Europe, especially some of the Scandinavian countries that have looked at this sector in a very different way, in a way that you can't be entrepreneurial and you can be impact driven at the same time.
What does that look like, Marc?
It looks like, tax breaks for companies that are impact focused. It looks like, loans or corporate structures that can be created whereby companies that are specifically focused on impact can raise capital in a more tax efficient way or deploy capital in a more tax efficient way. It means the removal of red tape, which we tend to be really good at in this country, on helping entrepreneurs be successful, especially with impact-driven activities. There's a lot of different initiatives. There's a whole series of white papers and, commissions and studies that have been done, but unfortunately very little has been enacted.
How do we make that jump? Because I see a huge parallel in education and education policy, right? Like we research and publish papers and white papers to death. And I think by and large, I'm fairly certain by and large, the audience listening to this knows the kind of things that need to be done. Can you give any insight into how you think we should be moving from, like how do we enact these kind of policies and things structurally? Like, is it a matter of, you guys like you and I running for office and getting elected and changing laws, or are there other, kind of more efficient ways of doing that?
Yeah, I think we could just look around the world, and a lot of people have figured this out, and just find things and models that are working and see how we can apply them within a Canadian context. And again, the Scandinavian countries is a great example where they really have embraced this third way. The social enterprises being, charities allowed to be more entrepreneurial, charities allowed to raise their own income outside of actually seeking donations. So the models exist. And so, I think something that Meta does, take a tip off what Mark Zuckerberg does, which I don't agree with a lot what he does, but one thing he does is he copies really well. And so going out and actually copying other people that are doing this really well and just, Canadianize it and make sure it works within our context and then scaling it. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. It exists.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I want to come back to a lot of the impact and work you're doing, especially in education. But just maybe a couple more questions on the personal side. When people look at you from the outside, like you see these two super successful brothers that, have, the big saying here in Canada, it's like, you've got to make it abroad to then be really recognized in Canada. And you certainly have been, both of you. But I don't think a lot of people understand the kind of struggle and strife to get there. Do you have any regrets or failures that you kind of made you stronger, made you where you are today? And, can you just elucidate for folks what the actual process of being successful is like?
Oh, for sure. I mean, as you go down these paths, there's lots of things to reflect on. Of course, what happened to us in 2020 is something that was still challenging during the pandemic. And we were asked by the government of Canada to help do a volunteer service initiative, not knowing that the Prime Minister himself wouldn't recuse himself from making the decision, in part of the cabinet decision when the dollars and the contract was awarded to us. And, that set up quote unquote a fake scandal in my mind, where the minority parliament, had all those challenges with, members of parliament on the opposition just using us as a political football to score points against the Prime Minister, who ended up being reelected anyways. And the damage that was done, our damage was significant, and it just shows you can do a lot of good work, and especially when you get involved. And albeit in our case, unfortunately, we made a decision to help in that case, but it became very political because of our pre-existing relationship with the Prime Minister's mother. It was really devastating. And then 9 months later, the independent ethics commissioner clears them, and says everything was done properly. But you still tell that to largely conservative media that looks for clicks, and a bunch of individuals, in the opposition who are just trying to bring the Prime Minister down at the expense of children across Canada. So, it's very unfortunate. It is what it is. And looking back, learned a lot of lessons. I lost a lot of faith in humanity and a lot of faith in the Canadian political process. But equally know that, the work we did was extremely impactful. The schools, the projects, the initiatives that we did around the world remain and sustain. And still every single day we reach out and we get kids, and now older young people talking about the impact that the collective organization and the work that our team had on them. And then we continue to do the work significantly in the US, primarily with a couple of the different projects that we're doing with, for example, the King family and Dr. King's oldest son, Martin Luther King III. And so the irony of ironies is that the project that we were hoping to set up in Canada during that time, this National Volunteer Service Initiative, has been successful, but just in the US. And we set it up in the US. The infrastructure is now existing in the US with hundreds of nonprofits and some of the biggest names and biggest celebrities and biggest individuals who are all rallying around this, making this work. But unfortunately for American students. And in my mind, that should have been here in Canada. But life takes you in different paths. And looking back at it, interestingly, Jason, it was the worst time of our lives. But that now being said, in retrospect, it was actually the best thing that ever happened to us personally, because we were able to recalibrate and refocus and spend more time with our family. And just, I'm a different person. I feel so much healthier and better. I was just running on empty. And now we're doing such amazing work literally around the globe with some of the biggest names in the world, having a bigger impact than we ever thought was possible. And so it's funny how life throws you these curveballs and you end up doing things that you never thought were possible because of them.
Yeah, well, if I can comment on that, I mean, to me, it's a great tragedy. I've been to some of the events that you've done here, and the response from teachers and students was like nothing I've ever seen before. So, I mean, I commend you for the work, and I think this is a good lesson for those, listening to build resilience and to come back from these things. Is there a path back for your work in Canada?
Our path is really just focused on massive scale and massive impact. We see that geography being agnostic for us to a certain extent to this point. We have so many thousands of schools and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of teachers engaged on the US side. And that has been keeping us really busy, especially with all the challenges going on in the US right now. But we're not seeking to bring back the big events or any of those kind of activities in Canada, but we're certainly not against it. But we're really happy and really proud and really excited with the work we're currently doing. And our core team, gets up every morning, and this team's been with us for 10, 15, some cases 20 years. And the impact that we're having is phenomenal on a global basis. And so that's very much our North Star right now.
Well, I think that's phenomenal, but I am through and through a Canadian. To me, this is something that has to be reignited here. I was born here. It's to me, like I said earlier, a real tragedy that it's not happening. So, if anything I can do to help you out, and the listeners here can help you out, I'm sure you'd find a lot of willing participants.
Thank you.
Okay, so on that note, Marc, let's switch to talk about public education and service in public education. In your view, like what are and what I love about your perspective is that it's global, right? We talk a lot here about Canada. We've had superintendents from the U.S. as well. But can you talk about like the key structural barriers in public education, whether it be like policy, funding, culture, that prevent real large scale impact? And if you can tell us how we overcome that, that'd be great.
I think this is just such an interesting and difficult time to be in public education. And that's where my heart goes to, because that's where I've grown up, and I'm a product of the public education system, and my parents both taught in the public education system. That being said, it's really challenging. That nothing that your listeners don't know, but I think AI is going to change everything. I really do. We work with tech entrepreneurs on a daily basis. We know the team at Microsoft exceedingly well. We've worked with them, for 2 decades at the senior utmost level. And just to see what's coming and what's changing and how rapidly it's going to be changing is slightly mind-blowing. And even the health area, which I'm also now intimately involved in, we work with high net worth individuals to help elongate their life. It's just a passion project of mine. It's kind of what I do on the side of the desk. You see how even AI is changing all of healthcare, and it's just remarkable. Like I was just with a CEO founder last week, or the week before in Kenya, and he was saying that with 80+% efficiency using his technology, which is very well refined, he can predict just by voice technology, like i.e. how I'm speaking to you right now, Jason, whether somebody has diabetes or not. It's just amazing to see. And his example was, the future of medical diagnostics will be with your voice and a scan of your retina. And that's how you're going to now, stand in front of your computer and find out what's wrong with you. And just to think of just how mind-blowing that is, and how that applies to education, and how education is changing just so rapidly, and the traditional structures of education. Everything any young person would ever want to know is on, ChatGPT or one of the versions of an AI group. And so how do we teach young people to think differently as opposed to consume and, retort information? It's just a totally different world that these young people are inheriting. And my fear is that the education system, for a whole bunch of reasons, is so far behind the 8 ball on this, and don't realize the extent of the changes that are about to take place, and are not prepared or willfully unprepared to help our young people be ready and ahead, and being able to absorb the extent of the changes. And then we teach young people differently, knowing that AI is going to be such a disruptive force of the world.
Yeah. So what does that teaching look like, Marc? Because I will say I do a lot of work, and in this space in particular, because of part of my background in philosophy and wrestling with AI for years. Me and my partners were really early to the game. We've done a lot of training and professional development with educators, but also a lot in the nonprofit space and the business space. And I see, for the first time, I've been in ed tech for better part of 2 decades. I've seen how slow those changes were. However, I see a big impetus for change now. Like, just to give you a sense, the Canadian districts are moving quite rapidly in trying to understand it and get their senior leadership trained and exploring. And I've never seen a movement like this in my 17 plus years in this space. What would you suggest to them are the key areas that they need to be thinking about, or, to your point, need to be moving more rapidly towards?
I think it's two areas. Number one is just how do we teach differently? And then what's our philosophy of education? And so how do we teach differently is knowing that AI is such a disruptive force. How do we not teach, the rote method of learning? How do we actually create critical thinking, and asking questions and looking at things differently and analyzing things differently? And like this, basically, I went to law school, And what does law school do? It teaches you how to think differently. And how do we teach young people how to think differently? So that's number one. Then the philosophy of education is the second area, which I think needs some TLC, is why are we teaching young people to think, and for what? And like kind of going back to the why. In Japan, they have this wonderful tradition. You have to ask why 7 times to get to the root of something. And at the end of the day, this technology is such a disruptive force, both good and bad, that we need to go back and we need to have young people feel a sense of meaning, purpose, love, connection, some very basic human emotions that technology will never be able to provide. And the sense of connecting to others, and a sense of helping to understand their feelings, and a sense of true connection to their teachers, perhaps not in a traditional academic way, but as a sense of mentorship, and a sense of somebody who's looking out for them, who wants to see them succeed, and who really cares and deeply loves them, albeit, just in terms of a relationship, because that is missing in so many young people's lives, both because of socioeconomic issues and everything that comes, inherited traumas, epigenetics, all that kind of stuff that comes from there. But technology is going to replace so much of what we're training young people to do. So who young people are becoming is the different question. How do we actually train and help young people become the best versions of themselves, and help young people become the best version that's connected to themselves? This technology is actually going to disconnect us from so many things. It's going to disconnect us from others. It's going to disconnect us from human interaction. It's going to disconnect us from the type of relationships that, we would normally have. And so the most important relationship that a young person needs to have is with themselves. And they truly need to have the best possible relationship with themselves, love themselves, and have a supportive adult relationship and relationships around them. And so seeing education as a means to foster some of the most important basics, and the most important basics are the relationship that young people have with themselves and their mentors, including their teachers, and going back to some of the basic human emotions that will create the wholeness among kids. And those young kids, as a result, will become great people who will then be able to use the technology to their advantage, as opposed to the technologies using them to simply extract additional dollars or profits out of them, which tends to be the case.
From your mouth to the ears of administrators, policymakers, and technologists all across the globe, because I think there is, let's call it a Silicon Valley version of education, and I think you've probably read some of these schools already, completely AI teacher enabled. I think, to me, is the death of culture, the death of civic society. So there is going to be that, cost savings kind of approach to plopping some robot of whatever form in front of folks. And I think it should be obviously the last place that ever gets touched by AI is like you're saying, the teacher to student relationship. Are there any structural pieces?
Just on that point, because I think what you said was so valuable, that teacher-student relationship, and I really want to commend you for saying that, because so many people in the next version will be say, teachers can be scaled down. We don't need as much teachers. Teachers could be there, to turn on to simply problem solve or whatever it is. No, that's not what teachers are for. Teachers are there to mentor and to love and to nourish kids. And that is nothing that a machine can ever do. And if we think that we're there to produce robots, well, sure, but that's not what education's about. Education's about providing and creating great citizens who are contributory and who have a great relationship with themselves, with others, and who want to make the world a better place and want to make society a better place and want to make our country a better place. That can't be replaced. And you can train, any AI model to the blue in the face, and it's not going to accomplish the ultimate goal of creating whole, awesome, balanced, loving, caring, engaged kids. It's going to create more productive kids. It may create more, smarter kids when it comes to standardized tests or whatever it is. But is that our objective? Like, I remember, one of our mentors growing up many years ago, he subsequently passed away years ago, however, was Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And we used to go to a conference every year, and he would mentor us because, candidly, he didn't want to talk to the adults, and we were kids back then, and he liked us, and he kind of took us under his wing. And, I've read The 7 Habits many times. I'm sure many of your listeners have as well, but one of my favorite is begin with the end in mind. at the end of the day, what are you trying to accomplish? Like, then once you figure out what is the end in mind, what is your objective, you work backwards. And I think the problem is that we have lost focus of what is the end in mind. We're so busy doing and so busy trying to catch up and so busy trying to compete. But for what? Like, what are we actually trying to do in education? What's the purpose of education? Let's go back to the basics. Let's go back to why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we putting these kids through these programs and activities and taking them out of their homes and putting them in this, structured initiative? For what? And yes, there's a bunch of reasons, but at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we are really clear with what we're trying to accomplish, and then how to use technology to advance that outcome, as opposed to just using technology to advance any outcome, which seems to be the plan right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Do you have any resources or any folks that you're following on this as to the new big question of the why? Like, there was obviously, I don't know how familiar you are with Neil Postman, but like Neil Postman was writing about this in the late 70s, that the education system is missing the true purpose of education, which is, education, and not only for a career, but education for a good living and a democratic society. Have you been reading anything or anything come to mind that would be useful for the listeners?
Well, I'm a chancellor at a college in Kenya. It's a top nursing and business college in Kenya. It's called Legacy College. I'm one of the co-chancellors, and one of the other co-chancellors is Simon Sinek, who wrote the book Start With Why. And it's not an education format, but I always go back to his point of, like, at the end of the day, people buy in not how you're doing it or what you're doing, but why you're doing it. And I know it sounds so basic, and it, Jason, slightly answers your question, but it doesn't, because you're looking at this rightly with the education lens. But at the end of the day, what he is saying is that this has to be part of our ethos. And we can't assume that the AI technology is going to have the right outcome in mind. We have to have the right outcome in mind. And then we need to use the AI technology to back into the outcome. And so as all of us in education, including me, I've got 2 young girls, care about deeply about the impact of education. It's not whether to use ChatGPT to write an essay. We're having the wrong debate. Who cares, in my mind? It's not what that is. It's about what is ChatGPT doing to us, for us, and what is the outcome that we're seeking, and how do we use ChatGPT or any one of these other initiatives to help us accomplish what we're actually seeking. Let's stop and actually have the most important conversation, which is, let's begin with the end in mind of what we're actually seeking to do with an educational context, and then work backwards from there.
Do you have any concrete ideas as to what administrators can start doing? Like, I think the most incredible thing that you've done is, and when I say you, I mean the collective group that you and your brother represent, right? You've had this really outsized impact from outside the education space. If you could more deeply connect or advise school districts, public school districts all across the globe, what are some things that you would strongly suggest that they can start doing immediately that will make an impact to understand this greater purpose, develop greater citizens, critical thinkers, like you mentioned?
I'm going to be very controversial here. I'm going to use a 4-letter word that's not often allowed in education, and that's love. Young people need to love themselves. They need to love each other. They need to love the world that they're inheriting. And we teach young people how to do things. We don't teach people why to do them often. Love is an important healing force in all of our lives. And we tend to shy away from this stuff because some find it woke, some find it woo-woo. At the end of the day, it's the most healing, remarkable thing that one can do is when one is actually connected through love to themselves and others. There's a powerful force that's created that allows young people, especially, to feel a sense of meaning and purpose, and they can go find their passions and do what they can do in the best possible way. And they become productive members of society because they're focused on the right thing, which is contribution, growth, meaning, purpose, and all the things that come from that term, which is love. The problem is that we have, desensitized feelings. We've desensitized character education. We've desensitized values and attributes. We've desensitized all these things because, there's somebody on the PTA that doesn't like it. And then there's one trustee who's got their nose out of joint. So we can't talk about these things, but we can talk about math scores, but we can't talk about feelings. It's just crazy. But like, are we trying to be robots or are we trying to be humans? Like, we're very good at human doing. We're not so good at human beings.
So for educators and students themselves, how would you suggest they, inject purpose, agency, service, love into the daily routines, in the public systems?
Well, I think teachers have such a critical role to play because I think so many kids don't have that stability, don't have that unconditional love, don't have that sense of connection in their homes because parents are working often 2 jobs and different socioeconomic issues. And, some of them might be coming from, different countries where they've impacted significant trauma in their lives, or some of them might be from traditions, including some of the unfortunate work that we've have to deal with when it comes to young people who have had violence in their background or whatever it is. The point being is that that's the role of an educator. It's not just teaching reading, writing, arithmetic. It's teaching young people to be good young people and to serving in that role model role when parents unfortunately sometimes can't serve and don't know how to serve because they've never been given those opportunities. So what can they do? Candidly, I think we can free up some of their time just so teachers can be there as teachers, as friends, and as mentors. I understand that everything is about test scores and getting to the next quarter and results and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, if the young person has a whole bunch of trauma and psychological challenges and a whole bunch of, dissociative events and all this kind of stuff, who cares if their math scores are best? If you have to go 20 years from now, fix them because they have massive depression and, significant mental health and physical health issues because they were never dealt with the childhood issues that were the originating of these issues in the first place. Like we're really good at putting Band-Aids on. We're not so good at going back to the root cause to figure out what the challenges are. So, if it was me and if I was running a school district, I would probably give the middle finger to the ministry and say, I'm just going to do this a little bit differently. And we're going to come up with a way that we're actually going to teach whole child education all the way through school. We're actually going to have conversations about meaning, purpose, and service. Service is going to be not 40 hours of community service that you're forced to do. It's going to be part of who you are and who you become. We're going to actually do this in a really cool, fun way. We're going to be in the community. We're going to actually create relationships with each other. We're going to create really safe spaces where young people can feel and have all the feelings and talk about what they need to talk about. We're going to engage the parents meaningfully in our school environment, not just during parent-teacher associations, but as participants because they're stakeholders in their community and stakeholders in their parents' education and their child's education. And we're going to do this in a way that, really talks about what's the objective of education. And we're going to reframe the objective of education. And we're going to create great people because we also recognize that the computers and all the AI functions will do what we're training the kids to do. So that battle has been lost. What has not been lost is creating great kids. And I'm really going to double down on focusing on creating great kids.
If you look to the future of education, let's say 20 years down the road, what does it look like to you? The good, the bad, the ugly?
I don't think we're on the right path because all these curriculum expectations that are usually set by the ministry are not going to take into consideration the rapid changes of technology that we talked about and the objectives that we're seeking. I think it's just everybody's like in the murky middle on this one, and we need to evaluate. What do I see education? I see education going through the craziest acceleration of technology that's ever been done in the history of humanity. I see a lot of teachers feeling out of sorts and out of place because they don't know what their role is, and administrators and educators trying to redefine a new role. I see kids knowing technology way better than the teachers do, and the teachers need to find a new way of engaging the kids that is not just about the technology, but it's about creating wholeness. I see some students and some teachers and some school districts doing this really well, and I see a bunch of school districts not doing it well. And I think the next 20 years is going to be like the ultimate roller coaster. Like I live not too far away from a big amusement park called Canada's Wonderland. And it's like, go on those roller coasters that go up and down. And sometimes you're feeling like you've got the wind between your wings, and other times you feel like you're about to throw up. And I see a little bit of that coming up in the next 20 years because, this is in such uncharted territories and we don't have a plan that's coherent.
If I gave you a magic wand and you could do anything to public education, and Mark, let me remind you, it's all powerful, what would you do?
I would redefine the role of a teacher. That would be it. The teachers are the most important people in the world. I truly believe that. And I think that teachers are so hamstrung by so much BS out there. And teachers go into education because they want to help kids, and they end up having to check a whole bunch of boxes. And I would let teachers of going back to the root cause of why they wanted to be teachers in the first place, give them sufficient structure and sufficient oversight to make sure that, enough learning outcomes are made, but equally recognize that teachers have a different role to play, and let the teacher figure out how do they create the best sense of wholeness in their school and their community for the students, and let teachers go back to why they wanted to become teachers in the first place.
Thanks for that, Mark. My penultimate question is, what are you hopeful for?
Oh my gosh, I'm hopeful for so many great things. I see what's happening right now with the work we're doing with Dr. King's legacy, and I'm just so hopeful to see so much good work being done in that respect. I see the work of this college, of which again I'm associated with. I'm the chancellor of, and I see the 200 some odd students who are nursing students who graduate every year, who are so excited to help go back into their communities and do good things. I'm excited for the work that we're doing in the space of health, wellness, and longevity, because as much as technology has some downstream negative implications, especially in terms of not working within the education sphere in the way that could potentially be most advantageous to us because of our policies. On the health side, I see us living as collectively, especially in developed countries, so much longer, healthier lives if you're interested in doing that, because the technology itself is just absolutely remarkable. Living another 20, 25, 30 years is possible for all of us, because the technology in the longevity space is doubling every 3 months. I think the world is an incredibly wonderful, awe-inspiring, complex, and challenging place all at the same time. And it's our job to find the good parts of that and lean into it, help where we can, and simply just leave the world a better place than we found it. And if we can do that, then we've lived a very successful life.
Wonderful. And my last question, Mark, what podcast, book, video, movie, album have you enjoyed recently that you'd recommend to the audience?
Hands down, I've just read all of Gabor Maté's books, all of them. So somebody who's big in the education space in Canada, I think a Canadian hero. He's actually coming up on our podcast in December, which I'm really excited that we've had everybody you can imagine on the podcast, from John Legend to Natalie Portman coming up. We've got the biggest names of technology, the biggest names of education, the biggest names of everything. I'm so excited for Gabor Maté. He is a legend of a legend of a legend. And The Myth of Normal, When the Body Says No, just all these books are must read for educators, especially The Myth of Normal, which is his latest book. Can't recommend it enough. It just reframes so much in terms of trauma, epigenetics, education for that matter, health, wellness, life, love, everything in between. Big fan of his work.
With that, thanks for being on the podcast, Mark. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate the time, Jason. Nice to have a chance to chat with you and your viewers.
This podcast is recorded on the Territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Buccheri. Until next time.